Great. Thank you, Ms. Larson. The COGCC hearing will come to order. It is 1:05 on Monday, April 13th. All commissioners are here via Zoom. And Ms. Larson, will you please conduct the roll call?
Yes. Commissioner Boyden. And just a reminder for commissioners, you are co-host, so you can unmute yourself and we can also unmute you as well.
Okay, I'm unmuted and I'm here.
Thank you. Commissioner Hopkins.
Here.
Commissioner Eaton.
Here.
Commissioner Gibbs.
Here.
Commissioner Hahn.
Here.
Commissioner Jolan.
Here.
Commissioner Mesner.
Here.
Commissioner Overturf. We'll come back to Commissioner Overturf. Commissioner Putnam.
Aaron, you're muted.
Commissioner Overturf.
I am here. I was unmuted by the host. Thank you.
Thank you. Commissioner Putnam.
I think it's still muted.
We just heard you.
Oh, okay, I'm here. Thank you.
Wonderful, thank you. Mr. Chair, you have 9 out of 9 commissioners present.
Thank you, Ms. Larson. First item up we have is docket number 2003-00060, Kerr-McGee Oil and Gas Onshore LP, operator number 4712. Ms. Larson.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I believe you will be hearing first from Director Robbins. Director Robbins, if you like, I can turn it over to you, and we'll be sharing the PowerPoint that you have.
Ooh, I don't know if I know how to do that. Can you just flip it when I tell you to flip it to the next slide?
Definitely. And I just want to confirm that you're able to see the PowerPoint that I have.
Yes, I'm able to see the PowerPoint, and some of the other commissioners are raising their thumbs, so in a positive manner. I see we have 6 people still in the waiting room. Do we need to let them in, or are they in?
Yes, I have admitted them all, and they're just pending the joining part.
Okay, great. Just wanted to make sure that the public is able to participate by listening into our meeting today. Hello, commissioners. Good to see you again via Zoom, and I appreciate your being here today for this very important matter. I will have a very short presentation to present to you about this matter. As you know, we have Mimi Larson online. Hearings officer Jeremy Farron is online. They can speak to the particulars with regard to enforcement on this case. Mike Leonard, my manager of field inspectors, is also online, and Mike can provide technical assistance or answers to some of the public projects if there are questions around those lines. This administrative order by consent, and to frame what that is for the commissioners as well as the public at large, that is a order that COGCC staff and I have put together. We have discussed it with Kerr-McGee Oil and Gas, and they have agreed to the terms of the order. So that's why it's an administrative order by consent. This order arises out of 4 violations that were found to have occurred on or about April 17th of 2017. At that time, the Frederick Firestone Fire Department responded to a home explosion and fire at 6312 Twilight Avenue in Firestone. The origin and cause of the explosion, as determined by the fire department, was unrefined, non-odorized gas that entered the basement of the home from a cut abandoned gas flow line that was connected to the well in question. The well was shut in that day. On the screen in front of you are the 4 violations that we have determined to be applicable here. The first is 324 big A dot small a. pollution for failing to take precautions to prevent significant adverse environmental impacts, and the unauthorized discharge of natural gas. The factual one-sentence allegation here is that gas was allowed to flow through the severed line. The second violation is Rule 605D for failing to ensure that the flow line was inspected at regular intervals and maintained in good mechanical condition. In sum, the flow line was not tested to ensure integrity prior to use. The third violation is Rule 1102A for failing to take reasonable precautions to prevent the leakage of natural gas from the flow line. In sum, prior to allowing gas to flow through the flow line, no verification was made to ensure the flow line was connected to production facility equipment. And then finally, Rule 1103, abandonment, for failing to ensure that the flow line was disconnected from all sources and supplies of natural gas. In sum, the severed line was connected to the wellhead. Next slide. Thank you, Ms. Larson. This slide shows the penalty calculations. The first penalty, 324 big A, little a, is a class 3 penalty. It is considered a major impact. The daily base penalty is $15,000. There is a 1-year statute of limitations. And so we were able to assess 365 days of violation. The penalty amount is in the right-hand corner. The second penalty and the third penalty were both class 2 violations. Again, 365 days of violation, resulting in the penalties in the far right corner. The last penalty was a class 2 violation. However, we applied the aggravating factor from Rule 1103 violation. That is the aggravating factor in that this incident caused death. That raises from a $10,000 base penalty to a $15,000 base penalty. The sum total of the penalties assessed is $18.25 million. Next slide. So we worked with our staff, and we worked with Kira McGee, and we also had discussions with Aaron Martinez with regard to the assessment of these penalties. And we also worked with our partner, CDPHE, and we have come up with a list of public projects. And rather than the money just being deposited in the Environmental Response Fund where penalties generally go, we have a mechanism to allow for us to use penalties in a manner to fund public projects that would not have otherwise been funded. I can go through these as is set forth here. Again, Mr. Leonard is on the phone if people have additional questions. But these are the public projects. If you want to go back one slide just quickly. The aerial survey of the DJ Basin to identify and significantly reduce leaks from pipelines and flow lines, as well as production pads, tanks, etc. That's a $2 million estimate. These are all estimates. The second is a $2.1 million estimate to acquire and staff the CDPHE mobile air monitoring van. This will be to supplement the current monitoring technology with the CAMEL, and the van will measure pollutants and help determine and locate leaks. $1.1 million estimated project to purchase 9 intrinsically safe optical gas imaging cameras for COGCC. And then the last on the first page is the $2 million to fund 2 years worth of research and development of satellite and remote sensing technology to help CDPHE improve effectiveness and efficiency of monitoring and inspections through better resource targeting. Next slide. And then the last projects that are currently being proposed are a $1.1 million to fund research and development at Colorado State University's Methane Emissions Detection Evaluation Center to develop and characterize leak detection technologies for flow lines. Third from last, $300,000 to update the COGCC's gas detection and metering equipment. Our equipment is presently on its sort of last legs, and so this will help us with that front. $42,000 to acquire remote methane leak detectors for COGCC. And then there's a $50,000 payment to reimburse the Frederick Firestone Fire Protection District for legal expenses related to the Firestone investigation and the NTSB Safety Board review process. As you can see, commissioners, except for the last one, which is a specific expense to Frederick Firestone, the rest of these are public projects that will go toward leak detection and flow line detection. And so these are in concert with ensuring that a travesty such as has happened will not happen in the future. We think this is a good use of the penalty money. We also have set up within the AOC a mechanism where the remaining money can be considered for future projects down the road. Next slide. In honor of the Martinez and Irwin families, the COGCC has named the Public Project Fund the Mark Martinez and Joey Irwin Memorial Public Projects Fund. And so I will be, as director, reporting back every 6 months to the commission with regard to the use of the funds. And so we will have a Mark Martinez and Joey Irwin Memorial Public Projects Fund update every 6 months to the commissioners. With that, I will close my presentation. I and my staff can take questions from you. And if not, then we would have Mr. Matthews followed by Ms. Martinez. Thank you.
Okay, are there any questions for Director Robbins before we move to Mr. Matthews? Seeing none, Ms. Larson?
Yes, thank you. Mr. Matthews is in the Zoom meeting and has been unmuted and is available to provide a few remarks.
I apologize for interrupting. Ms. Larson, Chairman Gibbs, do you mind if I jump in for just 1 second?
Please go ahead.
Yeah, please.
Thank you. Commissioners, this is Assistant Attorney General Kyle Davenport. I just wanted to do something quickly on the record and alert you to the fact that normal practices for the commission and staff to have separate legal counsel for enforcement matters. The process for this AOC differed from that normal practice in that I provide legal advice to the director regarding a few discrete legal issues before the AOC was presented to you as a final signed document. I did not participate in the negotiations between staff and Kerr-McGee. Before we move forward, I would just ask that Mr. Matthews, Occidental/Kerr-McGee's counsel, please confirm for the record that they do not object to my representing the commission today.
Can you hear me okay?
Yes.
Yes, we can.
Occidental Petroleum does not object to your representation, Kyle.
Thank you, Mr. Matthews.
Should I proceed, Ms. Larson?
Yes, please do.
Thank you very much for the opportunity to address you today, Commissioners. Kerr-McGee would like to extend its sincere condolences to the Martinez and Irwin families. Kerr-McGee would also like to express its gratitude to the local fire and police departments, the COGCC staff, and other first responders whose courageous actions immediately following the tragedy and in the weeks that followed helped ensure the safety of the community. Furthermore, we appreciate this accident also impacted the surrounding community, and Kerr-McGee appreciates their patience and cooperation throughout this process. Kerr-McGee remains committed to doing its part to make sure something like this never happens again. That commitment is reflected in the extensive additional safety efforts Kerr-McGee has taken in its operations throughout the state over the past 3 years, which are described in detail in its answer to the notice of alleged violation. It's also reflected in Kerr-McGee's negotiation of this administrative order on consent with the COGCC, including, as you heard, its agreement to pay a penalty of $18.25 million. As you also heard, payment of this penalty will allow the Commission to fund a number of critical public projects that will assist it in fulfilling its mission to protect public health, safety, welfare, and the environment, including, as Director Robbins just remarked, the aerial survey over the DJ Basin and purchase of a mobile air monitoring van, both of which we believe will enhance the ability of the COGCC to identify and significantly reduce leaks from lines and production facilities. In conclusion, Kerr-McGee knows that nothing it says or does here today can bring back what is lost in this accident, but it is our hope that the extensive safety efforts it has undertaken over the past 3 years and the penalty now being paid will help prevent a tragedy like this from happening at Grid. We appreciate the engagement and professionalism of the commission and its staff throughout this process, and we respectfully request that the commission approve the AOC. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Matthews. Commissioners, any comments? Okay, seeing none. Ms. Larson?
Yes, thank you. Ms. Martinez is on in the Zoom meeting and she's been unmuted. And Ms. Martinez, if you'd like to speak, we are ready for you.
Thank you. For my family and I, today is an impossible day. How exactly are we supposed to put a dollar amount to the lives of two extraordinary men who really shouldn't have even lost their lives like this in the first place? How do you attach a number to all that we have lost? How do you decide the appropriate measures for such extreme negligence? No amount of money can bring them back or lessen the intense amount of pain their losses bring. We are coming up on the 3-year anniversary of the explosion, and to the ones who love Mark and Joey, it feels like time has stood still. Nothing has gotten easier, and if anything, time has only intensified our pain. It worsens with each passing day, and it is hard to breathe. It is difficult to wrap your mind around the fact that a fine is the only recourse when such devastation and tragedy was the result. We have no other option than to accept what the COGCC can legally do. Regardless of the dollar amount, accountability is crucial for our state moving forward. As an industry, it is critical that you are held responsible to properly maintain all and any equipment left in the ground. It is your responsibility to make sure your equipment is working regardless of what happens in and around your industry. The bottom line, had you done your job correctly, my husband, my children's father, and my brother would be alive today. Had the flow line been properly abandoned from the beginning, then nothing that transpired after would have led to the explosion. I am encouraged to see the COGCC enact its new role to protect the public health, and this penalty sends a message that Colorado won't tolerate risky, negligent behavior that endangers our family's ability to live safely in our own homes. The penalty itself will be used to put practices in place and develop new technology that will hopefully prevent future similar tragedies. I look forward to seeing these in action. The prevention of a future tragedy is a great way to honor both Mark and Joey. I appreciate the COGCC's hard work and dedication in creating this fine and look forward to seeing the penalty at work in keeping us all safer. This penalty must set a precedent that will send a message that safety needs to be a top priority. I also look forward to participating in future rulemaking sessions and to continue to honor my husband and brother by fighting for change that will continue to make the industry safer for those of us in and around it and prevent a similar tragedy. One of mine and my children's greatest fears is that Mark and Joey will be forgotten, that many will think this chapter is closed, and that our very personal story will become just that, a distant story. I ask all of you to not let that happen. Remember that there is a loving, doting father that will never get to hunt with his amazing son or walk his beautiful daughter down the aisle. A wife, made a widow at the age of 39, who will never get to grow old with the love of her life. Loving parents who will never get to hold their little boys in their arms again. And grieved siblings who will never laugh and feel the ever-loving bond of their brother. Moving forward, we must continue to honor Mark and Joey. Safety in the industry must continue to be our focus. We need to continue the conversation and make sure that as industry continues to drill in Colorado, that our citizens are not put in harm's way and that no family ever has to experience a senseless loss like this again. A huge testament to Mark and Joey is continuing to remember their story and to use their story to evoke change. Unfortunately, we cannot change the past, but we can make the future safer for all of us who put our lives and our trust in companies to do their jobs correctly. In order to move forward, we must make sure there are no more senseless deaths and that the industry makes safety their top priority, and when they fail to do so, are held accountable. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Martinez. We appreciate all you have done for your efforts to improve the safety and the lives of all Coloradans. You are definitely making a difference. And while none of us will ever make up for your loss, your courage through this tragedy has been an inspiration to me and everyone. Commissioners? Ms. Larson?
Yes, I believe Commissioner Boygan had a question. I'm not sure if he is still on. Commissioner Boygan, I can unmute you, or I believe you also have the ability to unmute yourself.
Thank you, Ms. Larson. I had a comment and some questions. My comment, and it'll be brief because I agree with the chair, is that it's impossible for us to understand the pain that Ms. Martinez has experienced and that her family has experienced, or for us to make up for any of it. And I just want to express my admiration and appreciation for her willingness to put herself into this public forum and into this setting and into this regulatory environment to try to make things better so that this kind of tragedy won't happen again. I think the steps that have been taken, which are due in no small part to her efforts over the past couple of years, are a testament to the improvements that have been experienced and followed by the commission and by industry. I think Kerr-McGee's response is a reflection of the higher degree of consciousness that this experience unfortunately provoked. Flow line rules were a big step forward, and I know there are more rules to come. So I wanted to ask a couple of questions, perhaps of Director, perhaps of Mr. Matthews. The first is whether efforts have been made to hold Noble accountable, because as has been stated on a number of occasions, the original root cause of this tragedy was the failure to properly plug the well. Apparently, a report to the commission that was wrong or misleading in indicating that the well or the flow lines had been properly plugged, and a further representation to the developer that was wrong, indicating that the flow lines had been properly plugged. And so I'm wondering whether there have been discussions between the director and Noble as the successor to Patina around this to ascertain why this happened and to determine whether there is culpability for those missteps.
Director Robbins?
Yeah, Commissioner Boygan, thank you for that question, and Mr. Matthews may want to try to answer that as well. You know, I believe that the answer is no. We have been working with Kerr-McGee on this AOC. I think the question was somewhat asked and answered about other potential responsible parties back closer to the date of the incident, because this commission, or at least the director of this commission at the time, entered into a tolling agreement with Kira McGee, as opposed to looking into tolling agreements for Patina or Noble. And so at this point, we are precluded from seeking additional information or an AOC as against the other parties. I would also ask perhaps Attorney General Davenport if he has any thoughts relative to answering this question as well.
Mr. Davenport?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you, Director Robbins. I'd just like to take an opportunity to point out to the Commission that pursuant to Section 3460-124 of the Act, and in situations where a violation may have been committed by a prior operator, Commission Rule 524 sets forth a process to apportion liability or responsibility between operators. This rule creates a rebuttable presumption against liability for operators where a violation occurred under a prior operator and places the burden of proof on the director to present sufficient evidence to determine responsible party status. In my experience, both as counsel to the Commission and counsel to persons appearing before the Commission, this can be a complex and time-consuming process, which can also create uncertainty. Again, in my opinion, this AOC avoids the need to enter into that process, which it could be a significant benefit to the Commission. Those are my thoughts.
Just to be
Commissioner
clear,
Boygan, does that answer your question?
not really. To be clear, I was not suggesting that we hold up anything. I was wondering whether there had been any effort to investigate what had previously occurred and why it occurred, and potentially whether there's current responsibility for what occurred, recognizing that it occurred well in the past, although the well was put back on production over a fairly recent period prior to the fact that, or prior to the time when the exchange occurred between Noble and Anadarko. And so I suggest that it would be appropriate to have that discussion for no other reason than to make sure that the reasons for that previous failure are ascertained and prevented, regardless whether you think you've got any current authority to go to try to assess liability.
Director Robbins, any follow-up?
Yeah, no, I understand that point now, Commissioner Boygan. And let me see if I can bring in Field Inspecting Manager Mike Leonard. He has been much closer to the actual investigations that went on. Obviously, all of that was prior to my time. Mr. Leonard, do you have any perspective to weigh in on this?
Yes, if I could, Commissioner Boygan. At the time that the flow line was abandoned, it was a patina well. I don't believe Noble took it over until, I don't know the exact date, but it was later on in the well's life. So it was actually, and I believe Patina was also the entity that was in agreement with the town of Firestone to remove that line, if that helps any.
Actually, I knew that, and to me, that's a distinction without a difference, that we have a continual consolidation and change in ownership of properties. And I think Noble's acquisition of Patina was a merger rather than an acquisition of assets, but I'm not sure it makes a difference. But I understand it was Patina that engaged in the original act or omission. But to me, that's now Noble. So it's not relevant in my regard.
Chairman Gibbs, if I could.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Director
So,
Robbins?
Commissioner Boygan, yeah, I mean, I think that, I don't want to leave any stone unturned. And as opposed to what I thought the original question was relative to, fine assessment, et cetera, if there is and should be additional investigation to ensure that this sort of thing doesn't occur again, I think that's something that should be on the commission, and we can certainly look into that. And so I appreciate you bringing these points forward this afternoon.
Commissioner Boygan?
Okay, well, I'm not going to belabor the point. I've made my point. I do have one other question, actually two others. One is, I'm not sure how this escrow account is going to be set up and administered. I wasn't clear on whether it's a separate account maintained by an independent third party or just a segregated account maintained by Oxy. In this situation, given who Oxy is, I'm not really concerned because I'm confident the funds will be there, but I just wasn't clear what was contemplated.
Attorney General Davenport, you were instructive in helping draft that portion of the settlement agreement. Would you like to comment?
Sure. I think based on the terms of the AOC, which certainly the contemplation is that it would be a separate account, and I believe it sets forth various restrictions on Kerr-McGee, but I do not believe that it was intended to be a third party that was maintaining that account. Is that consistent with what you thought, Director Robbins?
Yes, sir.
Okay. Yeah, I think if you look at paragraph 3 of the order, it does list those restrictions, and I'm looking further on down, the escrow account paragraph 3I also lists those restrictions.
And if I could further answer, it's important for the monies to be in an escrow account and not be monies that are tendered to commission in order to allow for the public project Mark Martinez and Joey Irwin Memorial Fund funds to be used for public projects. And so we had to be somewhat creative in terms of how we came about with the escrow account.
Sure, and I understand that and appreciate that. Like I said, in this case, I'm not concerned. I think in future cases where we use escrow accounts, we're going to have to consider whether or not third-party escrows are required so that the funds are actually up and in place and in a secure holding. I'm okay with the way it's structured now. My final question has to do with sort of the generalized process to assure that the kind of behavior, the kind of conduct that resulted in this tragedy won't occur. Kerr-McGee has outlined a number of significant steps that they've undertaken, much of it voluntary, to improve its own internal process. The flow line rules dealt with sort of the macro requirements about how, for example, how abandoned or inactive flow lines are to be reactivated. And so my question is, are we giving any thought to requiring some of the procedures that Kerr-McGee has implemented for operators in general, whether it's in the DJ, in the greater Wattenberg area, or in other areas that are in or around populated communities? In other words, are there lessons to be learned that we can still implement based on the steps that Kerr-McGee took in response to this incident?
Thank you, Commissioner Boygan. I think that we are undertaking a massive amount of rulemaking under mission change, under SB 19-181. And I think that as we look at that approach, and I think it just makes sense to look at this incident and the measures that were taken following this to help inform the SB 19-181 process. And we're certainly, we will certainly do that. Unfortunately, we're in kind of a pause, but it is something that I think we should take into account. And I appreciate that point.
Thanks.
Are there any other commissioner comments?
Chairman Gibbs, can I just have a follow-up question to Commissioner Boygan's question?
Yeah, Commissioner Eaton, please proceed.
Thank you. I'm just curious, and I agree with what Commissioner Boygan just said about wanting to assure that if we have this kind of a settlement in the future and we have escrow accounts that they're as secure as possible. And I guess I'm just curious if there was a legal reason or just that prohibited, or is there anything that prohibits doing a third party escrow account in the future for this kind of thing? I'm not suggesting we need to do it here, but just going forward.
Okay. I'd have to defer to Attorney General Davenport.
Mr. Davenport.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Commissioner Eaton, I don't believe nothing sleeps to mind as something that would be in the future a legal impediment to creating an agreement, an AOC that states that escrow account would be maintained by a third party.
Good, that's helpful. I think I think for the reasons that Commissioner Boygan suggested, that this can be an important tool for us, and we may want to consider third parties going forward in other situations. So thank you.
Thank you for that comment. I think that I, as director, and Attorney General Davenport, as well as the others on our team, felt comfortable with the makeup of the escrow account, and we had discussions with Kira McGee about it, and we felt like this was, at least in this instance, appropriate. And we wanted to try to get this done so that we could, start working on the public projects from the Memorial Fund.
And I really appreciate that, and I appreciate the efforts to have the public projects be ones that really address the future practices, future health and safety, and the ability of the commission to assure that going forward. So thank you for that.
Are there any more commissioner comments?
Director Gibbs?
Yeah, Commissioner Overturf.
Thank you. So first, I'd like to just take a moment to thank Ms. Martinez again. It is difficult for me to imagine how emotionally grueling it must be to again and again channel your own devastating loss into the work of creating change at the legislative and regulatory levels. And so I just want to take a moment to recognize that you continue to serve the memory of your husband and your brother so effectively by creating change in their memory. So thank you for your willingness to engage in this process. And secondly, I would also like to thank staff for declining to utilize the duration matrix in calculating the penalty in this matter. Some of my fellow commissioners have heard me talk about the duration matrix often, but I firmly believe that that was the right choice in calculating this penalty. And so thank you to staff for that.
All right, thank you, Commissioner. Any other comments? Okay, I don't see any. Do we have a motion?
I'll move to approve the administrative order by consent as presented in today's hearing.
I can second.
Okay, motion's been made and there's a second as well. Ms. Larson, will you conduct roll call?
Yes, I'd be happy to. Commissioner Boygan,
Aye.
Commissioner Eaton,
Aye.
Commissioner Gibbs,
Aye.
Commissioner Hahn,
Aye.
Commissioner Hopkins,
Aye.
we'll come back.
Thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner Hopkins. Commissioner Jolan,
Aye.
Commissioner Mesner,
Aye.
Commissioner Overturf,
Aye.
Commissioner Putnam. Commissioner Putnam.
Aye.
Thank you. Mr. Chair, the motion passed unanimously.
Thank you so much, Ms. Larson. Thank you, commissioners, and thank you, Ms. Martinez. Okay.
Mr. Chair,
Yeah, Ms. Larson.
thank you. Mr. Chair, next on the agenda is update from Director Robbins.
Okay, Mr. Robbins, Director Robbins, whenever you're ready.
Thank you, Commissioner Gibbs, and I don't have any PowerPoints or slides for this. Just wanted to talk with the commissioners about rulemaking and where we are at this point. As the commissioners know, at our last meeting, I presented to you to suggest that the rulemaking that we had noticed, that is the rules from the 200, 300, 400, 500, and 600 series, those were all posted and on our website and posted to the Colorado Secretary of State on March 15th, a Sunday afternoon, late in the afternoon. In that posting, we identified April 29th as the initial hearing date for those rules. Shortly after that posting, in particular 2 days later, we received our first order around COVID-19, and we have been in the shelter from place or in place order since that point in time. In late March, I presented to you that given the place that we're in at this point, it made some sense to not have the initial party status filings as well as the initial party pre-hearing conference. And so we continued those to a date uncertain. And I mentioned that I would try to get back to you in mid-April, and here we are, it's already mid-April. So my report back to you today is that I and staff plan on, provided the commission is comfortable with this, going ahead and establishing deadlines for party status filings for the 200 to the 600. That deadline would be Friday, April 24th, and all of this will post to the website. And then we would propose to have the initial pre-hearing conference on Tuesday, April 28th at 1 p.m. That initial pre-hearing conference at this point would be scheduled as a Zoom meeting. And that's the meeting in which staff generally runs through the proposed rules and the edits and provides perspective to these parties who have identified themselves the previous Friday. At this point, we have a meeting with you the next day, April 29th. And I think that that would serve as a good check-in to make a determination of what are the appropriate next steps. So what this does is it allows us to have parties define themselves and have the initial pre-hearing conference. I would also like to report back to the commission that We are still taking informal stakeholder feedback on the 2 through 600 series. We have had, staff and I have had meetings with a number of stakeholders to receive some informal stakeholder feedback. All of that feedback that we've received since March 15th will ultimately make its way into the administrative record as it is required to. I also wanted to let you know that we also have been working from our homes, but over Zoom and through computers to further finalize the 900 series as well as the 1200 series. We have been working with our sister agencies, AQCC, on the 900 series, and then we've been working with Colorado Parks and Wildlife on the 1200 series. We've also been receiving informal stakeholder feedback from other stakeholders on those 2 series. So the work is continuing, even though we have not moved forward with the administrative 2 through 6. And the 900 and 1200 as well as the 800 are important components to mission change rulemaking. So all of that's continuing. It is our intent to get a straw dog rule out on 8, 9, and 12 as soon as we can, potentially this week. But as soon as we can, we're going to get that out. And so while we are having folks identify themselves as parties over the next 2 weeks in the 2 through 600, and then participating in the initial pre-hearing conference on the 28th, we would have these other rules rolled out as a straw man format so that we can start to get feedback on those. And then we would anticipate moving forward with those 3 sets as a separate rulemaking. We still have the wellbore integrity rulemaking. It's ready to go. It's set for June 10th and 11th. And so we would anticipate continuing to shoot for that rulemaking to happen at that time. And so then we would revisit with you on April 29th. And then we can, at that hearing, have discussion about what our daily lives are looking like, and make determinations about next steps for rulemakings at that point in time. So it's our hope that this proposal is doing a good job of accomplishing several goals, moving forward with rulemakings as we can, moving forward with the 8, 9, and 12 series to start to get feedback, identifying party status as well as the initial pre-hearing conference, and then reporting back to you on the 29th to determine the next appropriate best steps. Obviously, this is not how we anticipated our mission change rulemaking when we started in on this. I want you to know that I'm very proud of Coloradans that have participated with us in getting us to where we are. I'm very proud for the stakeholders that have been involved, and I'm really proud of my staff for having done such good yeoman's work to get us to where we're at. I think absent COVID-19, we were in a really good place to be able to advance mission change. But at this point, we're all dealing with the shelter from home orders, and we're doing the best we can with these Zoom meetings. So that's my report on next steps on rulemaking to the commission. I'm happy to take questions from any of the commissioners, and we'd kind of like to get some sense of a thumbs up that makes sense, or if you think otherwise, certainly would like to take questions on that. So thank you.
Thank you, Director Robbins. Questions? I'll try to click through here to see if I see anyone raise their hand. Here we go. Commissioner Hopkins, I'm sorry.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Just point of clarification. I'm sure I know the answer, but that April 29th hearing, that's a Zoom hearing, correct?
Yes.
Most probably.
Yeah, I think that's the right way to answer it is yes, most probably. Our current shelter from home order from the governor is due to expire April 26th. Mm-hmm. But I think at this point, we will anticipate that it likely would remain a Zoom hearing, absent hearing otherwise from our leadership here in the state.
Okay, thank you.
Other questions or comments? Is this I think this is,
Chairman Gibbs, this is John Messner. I've got a question.
yeah, Commissioner Messner, please.
Thanks. I wonder, Director Robbins, if you could talk a little bit about the intended technology or format to be utilized as far as conducting these initial processes and ensuring that proper feedback is being able to be given. I've had a unique experience, now conducting a significant amount of my meetings, well, almost all of them via Zoom or some Zoom-like format. And in some respects, I find it even more effective in in-person meetings, and but with some limitations certainly. So, has there been thought into what the format may look like to ensure that the same volume of participation can be that can occur through a digital or virtual format that we would typically see in a person format?
Thank you for that question, Commissioner Messner. As I guess to sort of answer that, yes, we are thinking about and continuing to use our Zoom technology. I have to applaud my staff, Ms. Larson and Chris Eisinger, who is also, the two of them have done a phenomenal job of organizing and establishing good Zoom meetings. I think today's another good example of that, even though we're not taking public participation, but we have had successful meetings with public participation. The next two meetings that are contemplated, or actually the next two steps, let me say it that way, that are contemplated, the request for party status, that's merely an opportunity for partners across the state to inform us whether they want to be a party status to our meetings. And so that would be a filing that would need to be done. And we have a significant email list of anybody that is remotely interested in anything we do. And so we'll make sure that everyone that is involved or wants to be involved will be aware of the party status filing to ensure good public participation in getting the parties identified. The next meeting would be the initial pre-hearing stakeholder meeting. And that meeting is usually a meeting in which we, my staff and I, walk through the rules before the parties and take questions so that we can make sure that everyone understands what it is that we're proposing. Those meetings, I think, can very easily occur via Zoom. We'll need to establish some sort of raise your hand sort of approach, but we can do that. So I think for the next two steps, we're in good places. If we roll into the next iteration of what this looks like and we're still doing things virtually, we will ensure public participation is as good as if we were doing it where we're all in the same room together. So we want to make sure that we can do that, and I think we can be successful given what we've done to date. But to a certain extent, each day we sort of reevaluate, so we take it one step at a time.
Commissioner Hahn.
Thank you, Director Gibbs. I'd like to just follow up on Commissioner Messner's thoughts. I think it's worth considering pursuing some rulemaking remotely, depending on how things pan out in the next few weeks. I know there are certainly some drawbacks, and technology has its limits, but one benefit to the Zoom process is that we are able to hear from people from all parts of the state who might not be able to be present at an in-person hearing. So while there are some drawbacks, there are also some positive aspects to considering rulemaking via Zoom. So I simply support the thought of making that something we consider in the near future. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Commissioner Hahn. Other commissioners, I'm going to try to flip through here to see if I see anyone raise their hand or just unmute yourself and start talking too. That can always work. Oh, here we go. Commissioner Overturf.
Yes, thank you. Just to follow up on Commissioner Hahn's suggestion and just to restate my own limitations, that it will be very difficult for me to engage in full day long rulemaking hearings during this time when schools are closed, because I am home alone with my small child, which is a strange thing to bring up in this meeting, but these are strange times that we live in. So I would just ask that be, as we're thinking about the schedule, if we do decide to move forward with some rulemakings, 8-hour-long hearing days, I will just simply not be able to participate. I'm willing to do my best to kind of read transcripts if there are parts of the meetings that I'm not able to engage in, but I just want to make sure everybody's aware of my limited ability to engage in the rulemaking process in this context while schools are closed and while my partner is still working. Thank you. Outside the home. Thanks.
Yeah, thank you, Commissioner Overturf. Other comments from commissioners? Commissioner Eaton.
Yes, thank you. And I see Commissioner Jolan down there too. So
Okay.
Thank you. I think, the staff has done a fantastic job of managing these meetings and getting up to speed on these technologies really quickly and helping us do that as well. I really appreciate that and that taking on that, as well as all of the other tasks that you guys have responsibility for and have also kept moving. I would love it if we can continue to move forward with rulemakings and figure out how to make that work over the next couple of months. And I agree that there are some both technical and sort of best practices that we can start to look at about how we can make that work. Because some of it is the technology, but as Commissioner Overturf says, it's also how we structure that. It can also be how we facilitate conversations among the parties and those sorts of things. So, and I know you guys are already thinking about that and moving forward. So thank you for that, and we'll continue to try to figure out how we as commissioners can help facilitate our thinking about those processes. Because I think it is really important to think both about the technology, but also about the social needs that we have about how to make that work. So thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner Eaton. Commissioner Jolan.
Yeah, hi. I agree with the comments that obviously the work is important and public participation is hugely important. And I think we've done a good job of adapting technologies to allow for both in difficult times. As a local public health director, it is very difficult for me to commit to anything for the rest of April, May, into, well, June, I guess is where, no, we're done. Yeah, we go into June. So if the state of Colorado is potentially looking at resuming some normal business after the 26th of April, that's going to require that will mean that we're beyond the transmission phase of COVID-19 and we're moving into potential for containment. So containment of communicable disease takes a pretty big lift and a redesign of local public healths around the state of Colorado very quickly to staff up, resource up, and change the way we practice. So I don't anticipate that April 28th or 29th will be good dates for me, and cannot tell you what the future will hold after that.
Okay. Thank you, Commissioner Jolan. Commissioner Putnam.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I think just to follow on to some of the comments so far, I think the approach of maintaining flexibility, see how things look later this month makes sense. Picking up on Commissioner Jalon's point, given that we don't anticipate a statewide peak of COVID-19 until into May, I think the chances are we'll be dealing with some degree of closures, well into the next month, if not beyond. And so I think it's pretty hard to plan, but it's also good to keep the flexibility just in case we're learning things every day. And therefore, it's hard to make precise plans. And I think it's good to keep the flexibility in.
Great. Thank you, Commissioner Putnam. I'm just scrolling down here to see if there are any other comments by any commissioners. I apologize if I'm missing any of you, but we happen to have 210 people on right now, so.
Chairman Gibbs?
Yes, Director
If
Robbins.
I could, I just would like the 210 people to know that if they scroll down and click on the chat feature, Hannah Hickham, my assistant, has very nicely shown everybody how they can go to our website and sign up if they would like to receive emails about any of the doings that we happen at the COGCC. So that email address is there on the chat button, and if folks sign up, they'll get emails of all the things that we're doing, and we'll be fully engaged from a public participation perspective. So thank you, Hannah, for doing that, and hopefully folks can take a look at that and cut and paste that into their browser. Thank you.
Mm-hmm. And Director Robbins, I don't see any other commissioners having any other comments, but do you feel like you have the direction you need?
I do, and
Yeah.
We'll look forward to getting all these new dates posted on our website today, and we will also look forward to reporting back to you on April 29th. I would also defer to Ms. Larson to see if she has anything more. She's our hearings manager. Ms. Larson, do you have anything further to add?
I do not. Thank you, Director Robbins.
Okay. Well, thank you, everyone. Let's move next to consent agenda. Ms. Larson?
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chair. Commissioners, you do have one item on the consent agenda. It is a recommended pooling order that was provided in your portfolio. And Mr. Chair, if you would like to entertain a motion on that?
Sure. Commissioners, do we have a motion?
I'll move approval of the consent agenda as presented.
Second.
Okay, the motion's been made and seconded. Any further discussion? Seeing none, all those in favor say aye. Aye.
Aye.
Aye.
Any opposed, say no. Okay, the ayes have it. Next up, we have a recommended order. Ms. Larson?
Yes, there is one recommended order that is also provided in your portfolio, and I recall our Assistant Attorney General, Mr. Davenport, has in the past provided a brief overview of that process. Mr. Davenport, if you would like to provide a similar overview to the commissioners as they entertain that portion of the agenda.
Mr. Davenport.
Happy to. Thank you, Ms. Larson. Thank you, Mr. Chair. Commissioners, if you recall, as recommended orders, these are the orders that become final orders of the commission unless you take action now to stay them. And so, Mr. Chair, I can, if I may suggest a process you've done before, if you can just have, going once, going twice, any commissioner now that wishes to speak up and make a comment about this recommended order. Otherwise, if no commissioner speaks up, then there's no action that needs to be taken and we can move along.
Great. Thank you for that guidance, Mr. Davenport. So we have this recommended order before us. is the proper term, going once, going twice. I'm just kind of flipping through here to see if there are any raising hands. Okay, going once, going twice. Okay, seeing none. Ms. Larson.
So the final matter that we need the commission to take on is a motion to adjourn.
Great.
So moved.
Second.
Okay, the motion's been made and seconded. Before we all vote, Director Robbins did mention Chris Eisinger and Mimi Larson. Thank you so much for helping to facilitate this meeting. Also, I want to give a shout out to Commissioner Leanne Jolan. You are covering multi-counties in this really difficult landscape right now. So I'm so glad that you're able to participate on this meeting, because we just know how busy you are.
Yeah.
So there is a motion and a second. Any further discussion? Signify as aye to adjourn. Aye.
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 Okay. We will adjourn. Thank you again, everyone.
Thank you, everybody.
Thank you.
Aye, thank you.